The desert stretched endlessly beneath the pale morning sky, broken only by the distant rumble of rotors cutting through the thin air. Master Sergeant Thorne's voice crackled through the radio, calm despite the chaos brewing below. Wildfire 7, this is Overwatch. We have eyes on the compound. Multiple hostiles, unknown count. Request immediate air support. The transmission cut to static, leaving only the sound of wind whipping across the barren landscape. 5,000 feet above, Captain Rivika Phoenix Kalendikar felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon responded to every subtle input, a $40 million extension of her will. The heads-up display painted targets in harsh green light against her visor, but something felt wrong. The compound below wasn't matching the intelligence briefings. Too many vehicles, too much movement, too organized. Phoenix, this is Command. Confirm your position over Grid 77 Alpha. The voice belonged to Colonel Morrison, a man who'd made his feelings about female pilots abundantly clear during her transfer briefing 3 months ago. His tone carried that familiar edge of skepticism, the unspoken question that followed her everywhere. Could she handle the pressure when it mattered? Below, the SEAL team had gone silent. Phoenix banked left, her aircraft's shadow racing across the sand like a dark omen. Through her targeting pod, she could see figures moving between buildings with military precision. These weren't insurgents. They moved like trained operators, and that meant everything had changed. The radio burst to life again. Wildfire 7 actual to any station. We are compromised. Repeat, we are compromised. They knew we were coming. Thorne's voice carried something Phoenix had never heard before: fear. Real, bone-deep fear. In the background, she could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire, followed by the sharper reports of American weapons returning fire. Phoenix's gloved fingers found the weapon selection switch, cycling through her ordnance options. 4 500-pound JDAMs, 2 Mavericks, and a full load of 20mm ammunition. Enough to level the compound, but the SEALs were somewhere down there in the maze of buildings. One wrong move, one misplaced bomb, and she'd be responsible for killing the very men she'd sworn to protect. Command Phoenix, I need immediate clarification on rules of engagement. Friendlies are danger close to all marked targets. She kept her voice steady, professional, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The silence that followed lasted exactly 17 seconds, she counted them, before Morrison's voice returned, colder than the air at 30,000 feet. Phoenix, you are cleared hot, make it count. But Phoenix knew something Morrison didn't, something that would change everything in the next 60 seconds. As she rolled into her attack run, the compound's layout suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. She'd seen this configuration before, in another desert, in another war. The memory hit her like a physical blow, and her hand froze over the weapon release. This wasn't just any compound. This was where Lieutenant Marcus, Ranger, Chen had died 18 months ago. Her bomb pattern was about to spell his name across the sand, whether she wanted it to or not. The SEALs below had no idea they were fighting ghosts, and Phoenix realized she was about to become one herself. The targeting computer locked on, and fate held its breath in the silence between heartbeats. Phoenix rolled inverted, her F-16 cutting through the morning air like a knife. The blood rushed to her head, but her vision remained crystal clear. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing had prepared her for the weight of recognition settling in her chest. The compound below spread out like a puzzle she'd solved once before, in the worst possible way. Wildfire 7, Phoenix inbound. Talk to me. She kept her voice steady, professional, but her free hand found the small metal dog tag hanging beneath her flight suit. Marcus Chen's tag, worn smooth by 18 months of grief and determination. Phoenix, we're pinned down in the northeast building. At least 30 hostiles, maybe more. They've got us surrounded. Thorne's voice carried the controlled panic of a man running out of options. We need immediate fire support on the western structures, but watch your aim. Building collapse could bury us all. Phoenix's targeting pod zoomed in, revealing details that made her stomach clench. The western buildings were arranged in a perfect line, their rooftops forming letters that only someone who'd studied satellite imagery for months would recognize. MARCUS, the terrorist cell, hadn't just chosen this location randomly. They'd built a monument to their victory, a cruel reminder of the American pilot they'd shot down and captured. Her fingers danced across the weapons panel, selecting the first JDAM. The guidance system painted a green square on her heads-up display, waiting for her command. But Phoenix's mind was 18 months in the past, remembering another morning, another desert, another desperate radio call that had ended in silence. She'd been Marcus's wingman that day, fresh out of flight school, eager to prove herself, carrying the weight of being one of only 12 female fighter pilots in active combat roles. When his F-16 had taken a surface-to-air missile in the starboard engine, she'd watched helplessly as he'd ejected over enemy territory. The search and rescue mission had lasted 4 days. When they'd finally found him, Phoenix had volunteered to escort his body home. "Phoenix, we're taking heavy fire. Where's that air support?" Thorne's voice snapped her back to the present. Below, muzzle flashes lit up the compound like deadly fireflies. The SEALs were fighting for their lives while she circled overhead, lost in memory. But memory was exactly what she needed. Phoenix had studied every piece of intelligence about this cell, had memorized the faces of the men who'd killed Marcus. She knew their tactics, their fallback positions, their escape routes. Command thought this was a standard strike mission, but Phoenix knew better. This was personal, and that meant she had advantages they couldn't imagine. She toggled her radio to the command frequency. "Command, Phoenix. Request permission to deviate from planned target sequence. I have tactical intelligence that could save American lives." Morrison's voice cut through the static like a blade. "Negative, Phoenix. Stick to the plan. Hit the marked targets and extract our people." Phoenix looked down at the compound again, seeing not just buildings but a carefully orchestrated trap. The western structures weren't just symbolic, they were bait. The real threat lay in the underground tunnels that connected every building, allowing the enemy to move unseen while the SEALs fought shadows above. She rolled into her bombing run anyway, but not toward the targets command had marked. The F-16 dove through 5,000 feet in seconds, its engine screaming defiance at gravity. Phoenix's hands moved with practiced precision, arming the first JDAM while her targeting pod locked onto a building that didn't appear on any target list. The structure looked innocuous enough, a single-story concrete block on the compound's southern edge, but Phoenix knew better. 18 months of hunting Marcus's killers had taught her to read the subtle signs. The building's walls were thicker than standard construction. No windows, single reinforced door, air conditioning units that were too large for the structure's size, suggesting underground levels. Most telling of all, no enemy fighters were positioned near it, despite its tactical value as a defensive position. "Phoenix, you're off target. Adjust heading 027 degrees. Morrison's voice carried a sharp edge of command, but Phoenix was already committed to her run. She released the first bomb at exactly the right moment, watching the weapon's trajectory on her display as she pulled up and away. The JDAM fell like mechanical justice, its GPS guidance system making minute adjustments as it plummeted toward the Earth. Phoenix counted the seconds, 12, 13, 14. Then the world below erupted in fire and smoke. The explosion was larger than expected, much larger. The blast tore through the building's roof, revealing multiple underground levels before a secondary explosion sent a mushroom cloud of dirt and debris 300 feet into the air. Ammunition storage, Phoenix realized. Maybe chemical weapons. The enemy had been using the compound as more than just a hiding place. "Jesus Christ, Phoenix, what did you hit?" Thorne's voice carried new energy, the sound of a man whose impossible situation had just become merely difficult. Phoenix was already lining up her second run, targeting another unmarked building on the compound's eastern edge. Through her pod, she could see enemy fighters streaming out of hidden positions, their carefully planned defense collapsing as their command structure burned. They'd been coordinating from underground, using the tunnels to move fighters where they were needed most. Now they were exposed, vulnerable, confused. Overwatch Phoenix. The compound has extensive underground infrastructure. Your thermal imaging couldn't penetrate it, but the building locations spell out enemy defensive positions. They're using our fallen pilot as psychological warfare, but they just gave away their entire battle plan. She released the second JDAM, watching it streak toward a building that looked exactly like a dozen others. But this one sat at the precise intersection of 3 tunnel networks, and when it detonated, the chain reaction brought down half the compound's eastern wall. Enemy fighters who'd been flanking the SEALs suddenly found themselves trapped in collapsed tunnels, their carefully planned ambush turned into a burial ground. "Phoenix, how did you know?" Thorne's voice carried wonder now, the respect of a soldier who just watched impossible odds shift in his favor. Phoenix banked hard right, avoiding ground fire that sparkled like deadly stars in her peripheral vision. She keyed her radio, her voice carrying 18 months of pain and determination. "Because they killed my wingman here, Sergeant, and they wanted me to know it." The transformation in radio chatter was immediate. Phoenix could hear it in the background, SEALs who'd been preparing to die suddenly coordinating flanking maneuvers, pressing their advantage while the enemy reeled from the underground explosions. She'd given them more than air support. She'd given them hope. Phoenix lined up her third bomb run, this time targeting the northwestern building cluster. Through her pod's cameras, she could see the compound's true layout revealing itself as smoke and dust cleared. The buildings formed letters when viewed from above, but they also formed a tactical network designed to funnel attacking forces into killing fields. Every approach route had been planned, every defensive position carefully sited to maximize casualties. But Phoenix had spent months studying this place, and she knew its secrets. The northwestern cluster housed the compound's communications equipment and leadership bunker. Take it out, and the remaining enemy fighters would be operating blind and leaderless. She adjusted her angle of attack, diving steeper than recommended, accepting the increased risk of ground fire to ensure accuracy. The third JDAM hit with surgical precision, transforming the northwestern buildings into a crater surrounded by twisted metal and burning debris. The explosion echoed across the desert, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch forever. Then Thorne's voice cut through the quiet, carrying something Phoenix hadn't heard since Marcus died, unqualified admiration. "Phoenix, this is Wildfire 7. Compound is neutralized. I don't know how you did it, but you just saved 8 American lives." A pause, then quieter. "Outstanding work, Captain." Phoenix pulled out of her dive, climbing back toward operational altitude. Her hands were steady on the controls, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. For 18 months, she'd carried Marcus's death like a stone in her chest. Every mission had been an attempt to balance the scales, to prove that his sacrifice hadn't been meaningless. Now, circling above the burning compound where he'd died, she finally understood what he would have wanted. Not revenge, justice. Not just for him, but for every American warrior who'd trusted her to watch their backs from the sky. The distinction mattered more than she'd ever realized, and it would define everything that came next. Below, 8 SEALs were going home to their families. Above, Phoenix Chenkalandikar finally allowed herself to smile. The flight back to base stretched across 90 minutes of desert monotony, but Phoenix's mind remained sharp, processing the morning's events with methodical precision. Command's debriefing would be thorough and probably hostile. Deviating from target assignments in combat was technically insubordination, regardless of results. Morrison would have questions she wasn't sure she wanted to answer, at least not honestly. Her radio crackled with routine position reports from other aircraft in the area. A pair of A-10 Warthogs returning from close air support, their pilots' voices carrying the relaxed satisfaction of a successful mission. An RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft updating its patrol pattern, gathering intelligence that would fuel tomorrow's operations. The ordinary business of war, conducted with professional detachment. Phoenix's hands found Marcus's dog tag again, running her thumb across the worn metal. She'd taken it from his personal effects before the funeral, telling herself she'd return it to his family when the time was right. 18 months later, the time still hadn't come. Maybe it never would. Maybe some burdens were meant to be carried, not shared. "Phoenix, this is Hammer 2-1. Heard you put on quite a show this morning." The voice belonged to Major Diesel Rodriguez, one of the few pilots who treated Phoenix like a colleague rather than a curiosity. His F-15 Eagle was somewhere in the patrol pattern ahead, invisible against the endless blue. "Just doing my job, Hammer." Phoenix kept her response neutral, professional. Word traveled fast in military aviation, especially when someone deviated from orders and lived to tell about it. By evening, every pilot on base would know she'd saved the SEAL team. By tomorrow, they'd know she'd done it by disobeying direct orders. The base materialized on the horizon like a mirage, heat shimmers rising from the runway in crystalline waves. Phoenix began her descent checklist, running through procedures she could perform in her sleep. Landing gear, flaps, fuel status, weapons safe. The routine helped quiet her mind, imposed order on the chaos of emotion and memory. Her F-16 touched down with barely a bump, testament to thousands of practice landings, and an aircraft that responded to her touch like a living thing. As she taxied toward the maintenance area, Phoenix could see the ground crew waiting with their usual efficiency. Within minutes, they'd be swarming over her aircraft, checking every system, preparing it for the next mission. But first came the debriefing. Phoenix shut down her engine and began the post-flight checklist, knowing that Morrison would be waiting in the ops center with a stack of after-action reports and a list of uncomfortable questions. She'd have to explain her targeting decisions, justify her deviation from orders, and somehow make him understand that sometimes tactical success required strategic insubordination. The canopy hissed open, releasing the enclosed atmosphere of war into the broader desert air. Phoenix pulled off her helmet, feeling sweat-dampened hair stick to her scalp. Her flight suit was soaked through with perspiration, adrenaline, and the peculiar exhaustion that followed combat operations. She'd been flying for 4 hours, but it felt like 4 days. As she climbed down from the cockpit, Phoenix noticed something unusual. The maintenance crew was standing at attention, their faces showing something she rarely saw directed at her: genuine respect. Word had already spread through the enlisted ranks, carried by radio chatter and the mysterious communication network that connected every military base. She'd saved 8 SEALs and destroyed a major terrorist stronghold. More importantly, she'd done it using tactics that no one else had thought possible. The story would grow in the telling, but the core truth would remain. When American lives hung in the balance, Phoenix had found a way to tip the scales. The walk to the operations center felt longer than usual, each step carrying her closer to consequences she couldn't predict. But Phoenix had learned something important over the compound that morning. Sometimes the hardest choices were also the most necessary, and living with the consequences was just another form of service. Morrison's office felt smaller than usual, crowded with maps, photographs, and the accumulated weight of command responsibility. The colonel sat behind his desk like a judge, his weathered face revealing nothing as Phoenix reported for debriefing. Beside him, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Voss from Intelligence Division held a thick folder that Phoenix suspected contained every detail of her personal and professional life. "Captain Kalendikar, have a seat." Morrison's voice carried no warmth but no obvious hostility either. That was somehow worse than open antagonism, suggesting a level of professional disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Tell me about this morning's mission. In your own words, start from initial contact." Phoenix settled into the metal chair across from his desk, her posture straight but not rigid. Sir, at 0730 hours, I received radio contact from Wildfire 7 requesting immediate air support. Visual reconnaissance revealed a larger and more organized enemy presence than intelligence had predicted. I assessed the situation and engaged targets that posed the greatest threat to friendly forces. You engaged targets that weren't on your target list. Morrison's statement hung in the air like an accusation. Care to explain that tactical decision, Captain? The question Phoenix had been dreading, but also the one she'd prepared for during the flight home. She met Morrison's gaze directly, her voice steady. Sir, the marked targets were decoys. The real threat was underground infrastructure that wasn't visible to satellite reconnaissance. The enemy was using our previous operations against us, specifically the loss of Lieutenant Chen 18 months ago. Something shifted in Morrison's expression. He glanced at the folder in Voss's hands, then back at Phoenix. Lieutenant Chen was your wingman, the pilot who was killed over that same compound. Yes, sir. Phoenix kept her answer simple, professional. No emotion, no justification, just fact. Voss opened her folder, consulting pages covered with Phoenix's photograph and service record. Captain, your psychological evaluation after Lieutenant Chen's death recommended extended leave and possible reassignment to non-combat duties. You specifically requested to remain in theater. Can you explain that decision? The question that went to the heart of everything. Phoenix had known it would come eventually, had practiced her answer in the mirror 100 times. But sitting in Morrison's office, with the smell of cordite still in her nostrils and the weight of 8 saved lives on her shoulders, the practiced words felt inadequate. Ma'am, I believe that leaving the fight would have dishonored Lieutenant Chen's sacrifice. He died protecting American forces, and continuing that mission seemed like the most appropriate way to honor his memory. Morrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. Captain, grief can cloud judgment. How do I know that your actions this morning were tactical decisions rather than emotional ones? Phoenix had expected the question, but hearing it spoken aloud still stung. She thought about the SEALs who were alive because she'd trusted her instincts, about the enemy network that was broken because she'd seen patterns others had missed. Then she thought about Marcus and what he would have said if their positions had been reversed. Sir, with respect, the results speak for themselves. 8 American warriors are going home to their families tonight. A major terrorist cell has been eliminated, and we've gained intelligence about enemy tactics that could save lives in future operations. Whether my motivation was tactical or emotional seems less important than the outcome. Morrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded toward Voss, who closed her folder with a sharp snap. Captain Kalendikar, you're grounded pending a full investigation of this morning's events. Phoenix felt the ground shift beneath her but kept her expression neutral. Understood, sir. She started to rise, but Morrison held up a hand. However, he continued, you're also being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Seems that saving 8 SEALs covers a multitude of tactical sins. The words hit Phoenix like turbulence, unexpected and disorienting. She'd prepared for court-martial, not commendation. The contradiction must have shown on her face because Morrison almost smiled. Captain, in 30 years of military service, I've learned that the best warriors often make the worst soldiers. You disobeyed orders this morning, and that can't be overlooked. But you also displayed exactly the kind of tactical thinking that wins wars. The investigation will determine which aspect of your actions matters more. Phoenix left the office with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. Her war had become personal in ways that command was only beginning to understand. The compound might be destroyed, but the forces that had killed Marcus were still out there, planning their next move. And now they knew that someone was hunting them specifically, someone who understood their methods well enough to turn their psychological warfare against them. As she walked across the flight line toward her quarters, Phoenix noticed something that made her pause. Her F-16 was surrounded by maintenance crew, but they weren't just performing routine checks. They were painting something on the nose cone, working with the careful attention usually reserved for special occasions. Phoenix moved closer, curious despite her exhaustion. The nose art was simple but powerful, 8 small marks arranged in a neat row, each one representing a life saved. Below them, in elegant script, someone had painted Phoenix rising. It wasn't regulation, and it probably violated a dozen different Air Force standards. But it was there, permanent as ink on skin, a declaration that Phoenix Kalandikar had officially arrived as a combat pilot. The investigation lasted 3 weeks, during which Phoenix was confined to base and restricted from flight operations. She spent her days in the intelligence section, analyzing enemy communications and movement patterns, building a comprehensive picture of the terrorist network that had killed Marcus. The work was methodical, demanding, and occasionally heartbreaking. Lieutenant Colonel Voss proved to be an unexpected ally. Behind her formal demeanor lay a sharp analytical mind and a genuine respect for Phoenix's tactical insights. Together, they mapped the network structure, identifying key leaders, supply routes, and operational patterns that had remained hidden from conventional intelligence gathering. Your friend Chen's aircraft carried comprehensive sensor recordings, Voss explained during one of their daily briefings. The terrorists kept the wreckage as a trophy, but they also kept the data storage systems. That's how they learned our operational patterns, communication protocols, and targeting preferences. They've been using our own intelligence against us for 18 months. Phoenix studied the satellite photographs spread across the conference table, each image representing another piece of the puzzle. The compound she destroyed had been just one node in a larger network, designed to lure American forces into carefully prepared killing zones. Marcus's death hadn't been random bad luck. It had been the opening move in a psychological warfare campaign, specifically designed to exploit American rescue doctrines and pilot loyalty. They're not just terrorists, Phoenix realized aloud. They're military intelligence professionals, former Iraqi army, maybe Syrian, someone with advanced training in asymmetric warfare. Voss nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we think, and it means that conventional tactics won't work against them. They understand American military doctrine because they've studied it extensively. Every playbook move we make, they've already prepared a counter. The revelation should have been discouraging, but Phoenix felt energized. For 18 months, she'd been fighting shadows, striking at targets that seemed to evaporate the moment she engaged them. Now she understood why. The enemy had been staying one step ahead because they'd been using American predictability as a weapon. But Phoenix's actions over the compound had changed the equation. By deviating from expected patterns, by trusting intuition over doctrine, she'd achieved something that months of conventional operations hadn't managed. She'd surprised them, disrupted their plans, forced them to react instead of dictate. "Ma'am, I'd like to propose a new operational approach." Phoenix kept her voice formal, but her mind was racing with possibilities. If they know our doctrine, we need to abandon it, fight unpredictably, use their preparation against them. Voss smiled for the first time since Phoenix had known her. "Captain, that's exactly what we were hoping you'd say. The investigation isn't really about disciplining you. It's about understanding whether you can do what you did over the compound consistently, strategically, as part of a larger campaign." Phoenix felt pieces clicking into place, understanding dawning like sunrise. "You want me to hunt them specifically, use their psychological warfare against them. We want you to finish what Lieutenant Chen started, and we want you to do it your way, not ours." Voss closed the folder, her expression serious but supportive. "The question is whether you're ready for that kind of responsibility, because once you accept this mission, there's no going back to routine operations. You'll be hunting the most dangerous terrorist cell in the region, with minimal support and maximum personal risk. Phoenix thought about Marcus, about the SEALs who'd lived because she'd trusted her instincts, about all the American warriors who might live if she succeeded. The answer wasn't complicated, even if the mission would be. "Ma'am, I've been ready for 18 months. I just didn't know it yet." Outside Morrison's window, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Phoenix of the explosion she'd caused that morning. Beautiful and terrible, like most things connected to war. The Special Operations Briefing Room existed in a classified section of the base that Phoenix had never seen before. Security clearances that went beyond anything in her personnel file, briefing materials that carried classifications she hadn't known existed, and personnel whose name tags had been replaced with call signs and unit designations that revealed nothing. Colonel Morrison was there, but he wasn't running the meeting. That honor belonged to a woman Phoenix had never met, Brigadier General Catherine Havoc Sterling, whose reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. Sterling had commanded special operations throughout 3 different theaters, accumulating decorations that read like a catalog of America's recent conflicts. More importantly, she had a reputation for unconventional thinking and absolute intolerance for military politics. "Captain Calendikar, welcome to Operation Nightfall." Sterling's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Before we begin, I need to know one thing. Are you hunting these people for your country or for your wingman?" The question cut straight to the heart of Phoenix's motivation, bypassing all the professional justifications and diplomatic language. Phoenix appreciated the directness, even as it forced her to confront truths she'd been avoiding. "Both, ma'am. Lieutenant Chen died serving his country, and hunting his killers serves the same cause. I don't see a contradiction." Sterling nodded approvingly. "Good answer, because the mission I'm about to describe requires both motivations. Personal investment ensures you'll never give up. Professional dedication ensures you'll never lose perspective." She activated a wall-mounted display showing satellite imagery of the region. "The compound you destroyed was one of 7 major nodes in a terrorist network that's been responsible for 43 American deaths over the past 2 years. Your actions have forced them into the open, and we intend to capitalize on that advantage." The display shifted, showing intercepts of enemy communications, movement patterns, and intelligence assessments that painted a picture of desperate reorganization. Phoenix's bombing run hadn't just destroyed buildings, it had shattered the network's confidence in their security. They were moving personnel, abandoning established positions, communicating more frequently and less carefully. "They're scared," Phoenix observed, studying the patterns. "They thought they were untouchable, and now they know someone understands their methods." "Exactly, and that someone is you." Sterling manipulated the display, zooming in on specific locations throughout the region. "We want you to keep them scared. Hunt them systematically, using the psychological profile you've developed. Force them into increasingly desperate actions until they make mistakes we can exploit." Phoenix studied the mission parameters appearing on the screen. Extended deployment, autonomous targeting authority, direct support from special operations assets, and rules of engagement that gave her unprecedented flexibility. It was everything she'd wanted and everything she'd feared, wrapped into a single overwhelming package. "Ma'am, respectfully, this sounds like an assassination mission disguised as tactical air support." Sterling's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested approval of Phoenix's directness. "Captain, these people have declared war on American service members using psychological warfare, torture, and deliberate targeting of rescue operations. They've forfeited any claim to conventional treatment under the laws of war. We're not assassinating them, we're executing them for war crimes." The distinction mattered legally and strategically, but Phoenix understood that it might not matter personally. Once she accepted this mission, she'd be crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, becoming something between warrior and weapon. The transformation that had begun over the compound would accelerate, driven by necessity and opportunity in equal measure. How long do I have to decide? You've already decided, Captain. The question is whether you'll admit it. Sterling's voice carried no judgment, only recognition of a truth that Phoenix had been avoiding. Your actions this morning weren't tactical improvisation. They were the beginning of this mission. Everything else is just paperwork. Phoenix looked around the room at faces that revealed nothing, professionals who'd learned to keep their thoughts hidden behind masks of operational security. These people dealt in necessary secrets, acceptable casualties, and strategic decisions that would never appear in official histories. They were offering her membership in a brotherhood she wasn't sure she wanted to join. But they were also offering her the chance to finish what Marcus had started, to ensure that his death had meaning beyond just another name on a memorial wall. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was an acknowledgement of who she'd already become. When do we start? General Sterling smiled, and Phoenix realized she'd just volunteered for a war within a war, one where victory would be measured not in territory gained, but in enemies eliminated. It was exactly what she'd been preparing for since the moment Marcus's F-16 had disappeared in a cloud of smoke and fire. The hunter was about to become the hunted's worst nightmare. The first target revealed itself 3 days later through a combination of signals intelligence and pattern recognition that would have impressed Marcus. Phoenix sat in the intelligence center, studying intercepts and satellite imagery with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The terrorist cell was reorganizing around a former Iraqi army colonel named Qasim al-Rashid, whose tactical expertise had made him invaluable to their psychological warfare campaign. Al-Rashid had been the architect of the compound layout, the mind behind the cruel symbolism that had turned Marcus's death into ongoing propaganda. Intelligence suggested he was operating from a location 30 miles north of the original compound, coordinating the network's response to Phoenix's devastating attack. He's good, Voss admitted, pointing to communication intercepts that showed al-Rashid's tactical adjustments. Within hours of your bombing run, he'd relocated key personnel, changed communication protocols, and established new security procedures. He learns fast and adapts faster. Phoenix studied the man's photograph, memorizing features that would help her recognize him if she ever got close enough. Mid-40s, graying beard, intelligent eyes that suggested professional military training rather than religious fanaticism. The kind of enemy who made wars longer and casualties higher through sheer competence. Where is he now? Voss switched the display to real-time satellite feeds, showing a cluster of vehicles moving through the desert in tactical formation. Mobile convoy, changing locations every 6 hours. He's learned not to trust fixed positions, but that mobility creates its own vulnerabilities. Phoenix studied the convoy's movement pattern, noting the discipline and spacing that suggested professional training. 3 vehicles in loose formation, maintaining communication intervals and defensive positioning even while moving at highway speeds. Al-Rashid was treating the desert like a battlefield, which meant he could be engaged like a military target rather than a terrorist hiding among civilians. Ma'am, I need a real-time intelligence feed and permission to engage targets of opportunity. If we're going to hunt him effectively, I can't wait for traditional mission approval cycles. Sterling's voice came from behind them, startling Phoenix, who hadn't heard the general enter. Captain, you have both. Your F-16 is being fitted with enhanced communication systems and targeting pods that will give you direct access to our intelligence network. When you identify al-Rashid, you'll have authority to engage immediately. Phoenix turned to face Sterling, nodding the general's expression of professional satisfaction mixed with something that might have been concern. Ma'am, what about collateral damage considerations? rules of engagement in areas with potential civilian presence. Al-Rashid forfeited his claim to those protections when he started using American deaths as psychological weapons. He's a legitimate military target under any interpretation of the laws of war. Sterling's voice carried the authority of someone who'd made similar decisions before. Your only constraint is ensuring American forces aren't endangered by your actions. The words should have felt liberating, but Phoenix found herself thinking about Marcus and what he'd have said about unlimited hunting licenses. He'd always believed that maintaining moral superiority was essential to strategic victory, that becoming like the enemy meant losing even when you won. The balance between justice and revenge was thinner than Phoenix had realized, and she was walking that line with every decision. General, I understand the mission parameters, but I need to know, when this is over, when Al-Rashid and his network are eliminated, what happens to me? Do I go back to routine operations, or have I become something else permanently? Sterling's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Captain, warriors like you don't retire from special operations. They either die in service or find ways to pass their skills to the next generation. The choice of which path you take will be yours, but it won't be made until this mission is complete. Phoenix nodded, understanding more than Sterling had actually said. She was being recruited for a world that existed in the shadows between official military operations and necessary actions that couldn't be acknowledged. Success would bring opportunities she'd never imagined. Failure would bring consequences she didn't want to contemplate. When do I launch? 0600 tomorrow. Al-Rashid's convoy will be moving through open desert during daylight hours, providing optimal engagement conditions. Sterling handed Phoenix a sealed briefing packet. Everything you need to know about the target area, expected opposition, and extraction procedures if things go wrong. Phoenix accepted the packet, feeling its weight like a physical manifestation of the responsibility she was accepting. Tomorrow, she would cross the line from military pilot to special operations warrior, and there would be no going back. That evening, Phoenix sat alone in her quarters, reading Marcus's final letter to his family. She'd carried it for 18 months without opening it, but tonight felt like the right time to honor his final thoughts. The words were simple, personal, achingly human, a young man's attempt to tell his parents that he loved them and understood the risks he'd accepted. Tomorrow, she would begin writing her own final chapter in Marcus's story. Whether it ended in victory or tragedy would depend on skills she'd developed, instincts she'd honed, and choices she'd make in the heat of combat. But it would end, one way or another, with justice for the man who'd trusted her to watch his back and deserved better than the fate he'd received. Phoenix folded the letter carefully, placing it beside Marcus's dog tag in the small wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions. Tomorrow she would carry both into battle, not as burdens but as reminders of who she was fighting for and why it mattered. The hunt was about to begin. Dawn came to the desert like a whispered promise, soft and golden and deceptively peaceful. Phoenix completed her pre-flight inspection with methodical thoroughness, checking every system, every connection, every detail that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Her F-16 had been modified overnight with equipment she'd never seen before, enhanced sensors, encrypted communication systems, and targeting.